this is just a fun story, but it kind of has. We went to lunch with the whole team at Gaspard Games. We were just starting to work on Supreme Commander, and I told the whole team, I said, I've decided the name of the game is going to be called Supreme Commander. And after everybody got back to their desks from lunch, one gentleman came to my desk, my office, and he was kind of standing in the doorway, and he leaned in and he goes, I have to tell you this. Supreme Commander is the worst name I have ever heard in my life. And I was like sitting there hearing this, and I just kind of like, wow, like you just said those words. You are on my payroll. And you just told the guy of me that is the worst game you ever heard. And I turned around and I said, you're mistaken. That is the greatest name for an RTS game in the history of RTS games. I've never stopped telling that story because it's such a great story. And I got something for that guy. That is the greatest name for an RTS game in the history of RTS games. Sorry, buddy.
Welcome back to We Thought It Would Be Easy, where we uncover the chaos and creativity behind your favorite games and stories. I'm Jonathan Grant, joined by my co-host, game design legend Jordan Weisman, the creative brain behind Battletech Shadowrun, and much more. Each week, we are diving into candid talks with bold creators, shaping worlds across all different mediums. Jordan, are you ready to go?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, for all that gratuitous plugging. And today, super excited to bring onto the show and a good friend. I don't say that often, but a really good friend, Chris Taylor, who is the mind behind classics such as Total Annihilation, Dungeon Siege, Supreme Commander. Chris founded Gas Powered Games and has spent his career pushing creative boundaries and pushing people's buttons. Both of those, taking big risks that most people wouldn't dare. Chris, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great. It's great to be here and on this kicking off sort of the inaugural series, if you will. It's always fun. And I appreciate you guys thinking of me and reaching out.
Well,
We think of like a creative process, man, or lack thereof. It's like you're first on my list, you know?
Yeah. Well, and not to mention, one of your many crimes you committed against the games industry was, as I mentioned earlier, giving me my first job in the industry.
Yeah.
So, how could we not talk to you? In fact, wait a second. Jordan's got a mug, and you know what? I got a mug too. How about that?
Oh, you got a Gas Powered Games mug. Oh,
Heck
look at that.
yes.
I think as Chris and I can both attest, like companies come and go, but the merch, like, stays forever,
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Well, let's dive in. And so, as I reviewed, and I didn't touch anywhere near all your credits. You got into games early and young, and when the industry was relatively young as well. Um, talk about not so necessarily your first job, but like what was like the first big creative decision you made on a game, and did it work or was it like did it just go belly up?
Well, the first assignment that I got was to make Hardball the sequel to Hardball. Back then, there was this big breakout hit on the Commodore 64 called Hardball by a programmer designer, the one-man teams of the day, Bob Whitehead. That was a big hit. And so when I came in, they said, we want you to do the sequel. So I was like, oh my God. Well, that was like a lot of big shoes to walk in, right? But it was also, in fairness, pretty creatively constrained, right? You're not gonna make, it wasn't like one of those Tecmo Bowl games or whatever, or what, these games where they kind of do everything at hyperbolic levels in the extremes, and when you hit the ball there's a big pile, kind of cartoonifying it and everything else. It was kind of a serious baseball game, so I didn't do a lot of crazy, but man, oh man, did that lay down the technical foundation for everything that I would do in my career, which was so strange, right? And one of the number one things that I learned on that first game was, wait for it, data-driven systems, right? people are like, what? Baseball. And it was like, because we didn't have an MLB PA license. We didn't have an MLB. Both of these you needed team names and player names. So what we did is we built an editor that was built into the executable. So like it wasn't a separate thing. It was all built into one experience. And you could then go in at home and enter in all the names and statistics. What I did is what we did was we allowed people to enter in their own teams. And so you could kind of get around the licensing thing. Because what you did at home in the privacy of your own house was your
Right.
business.
Yeah,
And that,
A, that was very clever, and B, really, as you said, very, very formative in terms of data-driven systems for you.
that's right. That's
So
right.
you were a programmer at this point, or were
Yes.
you kind of programmer plus?
You know, it's funny. They never said to you, congratulations, you've got the job. You start Monday and you're both the lead programmer, the only maiden programmer, and you're also the designer and the only one who gives a shit. Most of the time throughout the development process. In fairness, at the end, you have a producer from the publisher who basically gave me a bug list. Never said,
Wow.
can we change the font? Can we ship? And I didn't even think to say, hey, aren't you supposed to be making my life miserable right now? I never thought to ask, because I just thought, yeah, I have bugs. Shelly has a bug list for me. I would go through the bugs and I would fix it. And when all the bugs were fixed, wait for it, we just shipped the damn game. Okay.
So,
So
that's amazing.
Well, I mean, so I think the decision to let the people put in all their data and name that, was that something you had come up with, or was that part of Baseball 1 or Hardball 1?
I don't remember. I mean,
Okay.
this is 30.
Yeah, I know. It's freaking forever ago. Yeah.
It was 1989 that it shipped. So we did most of the development was throughout, that 18, I think it was an 18 or 20-month development cycle. I noticed you had the credits up on the screen, right? And Don gets #1 billing for design. And then I'm down at the bottom. I mean, this is a funny game we play when it comes to credits, right? This is a funny game we play. Let me just leave it at that.
You're last.
Oh, good. Bring up Don's face. You guys want to send me into a cart? I'm going to be
no, we can't turn him to 11 yet. Come on, let's at least get into.
Did we
no,
all?
We turn to Crystal 11.
Jordan, you never worked with Don, did you?
No, I can't say I ever had the quote unquote pleasure.
I worked for Don at Zynga. I actually pitched to Don for a couple times. I'm sure he doesn't remember. But yeah, that's funny. It's the industry has gotten a lot bigger, but it's still really small. But anyway, back to Hardball.
Well,
so
if we're gonna harangue on Don, let's give Don a shout out for being the man who gave me my first job in the business, just like I did for you. See, the circle of life is almost complete here.
That's cool. So he's the one that brought you in, and then you worked. So then take us past Hardball. What came next?
Yeah, so Hardball, we worked on a game. I got it here. I just happen to have this one here. It was called 40 Boxing. This will save you, Jonathan, from pulling it up on the internet. This was conceived by Don and Stan Chow, I believe, to do a 3-dimensional, if you see on the back of the box here, actual sort of kind of like Money for Nothing video, the Dire Straits style characters. Let me see if I can get closer here, where you actually rendered the characters in a 3D environment with a camera. But we had 4.77 megahertz PCs, which was the original PC spec, which meant if it took you forever just to polyfill one of those polygons. So you weren't going to be doing a whole lot. The game turned out actually really well. We were one of the first games, I think, ever to use what we thought of was motion captured 3D information. We had a guy, I met him at the arcade. Forget his name comes in out of my head, but he had a boxer's name. It was amazing. And he had his nose was kind of smashed in a little bit. And I said to him at the arcade, I said to him, do you know anything about boxing? And he goes, yeah, I'm a professional boxer. Well, boy, I'll tell you, I was like, am I in a simulation? Because we got this guy, we put Jay McDonald, who is my partner in crime on this on the engineering team, we taped him up and we set up cameras at 90-degree angles in a gymnasium. So if you know anything about photography, which I'm sure you guys do, by pulling the cameras back 50, 60 feet and then zooming in with the camera,
Yeah, flattens it out. Yeah,
you get rid of all the perspective.
exactly. Yeah.
And this is how we motion captured all of these boxing moves with this guy. His name was Paul Savage. That was his name. I think that was his name, Paul Savage. Did he get credit? He didn't get credit. Sorry, Mr. Savage.
Maybe Don's name maybe took his spot.
Seeing rotoscoping.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how we did this. And this was Jay McDonald's brainchild, that we would set up two cameras at a 90-degree angle. We didn't have the full, deals they have today.
Yeah, of course.
And honestly, I think this was like, I don't think anyone's ever told me about something else that was motion captured.
What year was it?
This was like 91 or 90, maybe 90 something.
Yeah.
91.
Oh,
Yeah.
little softer.
God, you're bringing back memories.
And technically, what was the fourth dimension?
Well,
that was
the
rendered
name.
there?
That was more like a marketing hook name, and I just was like, great, 3D boxing probably doesn't have enough zing, but maybe Don, or maybe you can get them on the show
and ask them, where was the fourth D? Come on, truth in
Yeah.
advertising. Where was the
But, like,
fourth D?
We're only here to talk about one thing, and that's 4D. I mean, this is rad. Like, so not only are you, you're data driving, you're doing motion capture. It's like, what a start in the games industry. I mean, were you like, what is this crazy job that I have?
that's you've really captured it just right there. What is this crazy job? And we just took it one day at a time. We just did what we had to do. And I have to admit, though, I knew I was kind of going in the right general direction, but there was no focus to my career, right? I wasn't picking the titles that I worked on. I wasn't, this is what was up next, and you're doing it. And it wasn't until I left EA Canada and I went and joined up with Ron Gilbert, Shelley Day, and worked on and did the total Annihilation thing. That was a big moment that I was doing exactly what I wanted to do with my game career, if you will.
So
Wow.
let's talk about that for a second, because that's exactly the kind of big leap that is just enormously scary, because it could have gone in a million different ways wrong. So how did that come together, and what encouraged you to take that leap and say, I'm going to throw away this perfectly good career at Electron, this little company called Electronic Arts, and go off and strike out on my own?
It's interesting that if I had been thinking straight, like if I was sort of money focused and sort of like, I just want to make a bunch of money and I just want to be retired when, say, I'm 50, which many of the folks that I worked with, I was the 16th employee and there was about 20, 30 of us. That whole group is pretty much retired, and they're all very, very wealthy because they stayed in that lane. They decided to build EA Sports games and they went all the way to the end. And when you jump and you move to something else, you do give up fortune, but you kind of get fame. If you think about it, like a slider in one of these boxing screens, you slide one for the other, which is really, really kind of interesting. Now, your question is like, did I kind of even realize I was doing that? That I said, I want to get out there and create my own stuff. I want to I want to have a name that I've built for myself and what have you. Or do I want to just stack away cash, in the engine room of EA? And I don't think it was a conscious thought about the money, but it was definitely like, I want to make stuff that I love. Not just because I did this game. This was the last game I did before I left Canada. It was called Triple Play 96. And by this point, the teams were really, really big. You were working on smaller and smaller piece of it, although it was the core gameplay and stats engine that I did build. And I knew, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And by the way, this was not the last game. There was another game called that took this engine and put it on the 3DO called Virtual Stadium Baseball 3DO. I'll be honest with you. Um, I was like 3 strikes and you're out. Like I can't do. I know. I thought I was. I thought I was.
Yeah, you got to use a baseball reference. Come on, right?
And yeah, this is beautiful compared to already. You see the amount of difference between 95 and 89.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, really big upgrade.
Did you have a sense in this moment? I mean, you must have, you took this huge leap, right? Which is a crazy leap to
It
take.
was.
Um, did you have a sense of how big games were going to be?
I never would have imagined that games would become so big they would actually jump the shark completely and start destroying people's lives. Like that actually was that was the hardest. That's been the hardest part of this 35 to whatever year journey, was to see games. They were cool, then they were really cool, and they were super fun, and they were awesome, and then they were like starting to be subtractive, right? People were, when you see a South Park episode and Cartman is having his bedpan changed by his mother in the seat while he's playing some online game, and you're like, that's not far off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a little too close for comfort. Yeah.
And I realized that, it got so big, it got kind of painful for me, actually.
Well, I want to come back, and those are, yeah, I want to talk about that later about the kind of where you see things are and where they and how they got there. Um, uh, but when you started up and started working on Total Annihilation, it wasn't just let's go start a company. It was also let's really explore a new genre and help and actually really help form that genre, right? So you were working with a lot of clean pieces of paper there on that design. What were some of the motivations that led you towards that? What was the kind of creative process that arrived at Total Annihilation?
Well, I would say that it was frustration in a weird way. It was a love of the genre. Like, okay, so it was Westwood's Dune 2 that I played, and I was like, this is awesome. This is fantastic. Then we uh then I was waiting while I was doing triple play and while I was doing virtual stadium baseball, I was waiting for Westwood's Command and Conquer, which I'd read in magazine articles about. And I never did that. I never pined for something coming from a studio like I did with Westwood. When I got Command and Conquer and I started playing it, I was like, okay, this is awesome. This is absolutely what I wanted. I wanted more of the tanks and, whatever. But the physics were failing. The size of the screen was too small. My ability to do a lot of commands was really limited. Like, I felt like I was operating in this tiny, tiny little space, and I wanted more. And I especially wanted physics, because physics was what I used in the baseball games. An X, Y, and Z value on everything, right? And then I could do collision detections in 3 space and everything would come together. So it was like, this has got to be a 3D game, 100% 3D game. And that was probably the single biggest differentiating factor. And when there was literally 100 RTS games that were in development in that same exact time, the reason I know is because Michael Wolf came from PC Gamer, and he said, after he met with us, we had that wonderful sort of experience. Oh, he's come to have a little look at what we're doing. He goes, did you know there are like 100 of these in development? And you would never know, except that when the guy from PC Gamer, who's like a bumblebee or whatever, he's going to every flower in the garden, and he knows what's going on more than anyone else, like in the industry. It's like a satellite view of what's happening in the industry. And he tells you that, you're kind of like going, shit, we really we're blindly going into battle and we have no idea what we're up against. This is really amazing. And we did okay.
This game comes out. I'm working in Northern Bellevue in an Egghead software store. And I am selling everyone who comes in the door
Man.
this game, because I'm like, all the other RTS games, they're fake. Like, they're just not dynamic enough. They're kind of one-dimensional. This is the game. Total Annihilation, man. got to share a great anecdote about when I worked for Chris. One night, I've been waiting. I've been like working at the company for months. And one night we agree that we're all going to play TA together. We get together. Chris is playing. Bart is playing. Bart. And it's like a version of this game that I have never even seen or played by myself. I mean, I think I played for like 45 minutes, and then all of a sudden an absolute avalanche of bombers just flew over my base once and wrecked it. I mean, they like the guys on the team uh knew how to play at a whole different level, and the game had the design space for it. That's what really blew me away. It's like, you know, how did you you know, you talked about like your desire for 3D and stuff, but to me the whole point about TA was that it just had a crazy scale that nobody else had. Is that, do you think that's accurate?
Well, I think so. Well, back, you know, the old saying, bigger is better. And then we, of course, have the counter statement, bigger is not better. We, both of those forces are acting against each other. But back in the early days, everything was so damn small. You had the only direction you could go was bigger, and it was always the right answer. Now, we did get to the point, I don't know what the exact year was, 2004, I don't know, where we went, okay, it's too big. Come back, come back. You don't keep making shit big. Don't add more units. Don't add more factions. Don't add more this. You're not making the core experience better, like a 9-hour movie or something. You know, it's just not going to be a good, not going to be a good experience. We actually see that in film, right? Get up to 3 hours and everyone's tapping out. They're like, no, you've
Yeah.
taken it too far. But then, you know, an hour and 35 minutes is like the lower end. So there is a sweet spot.
I'm still like, if you can't tell your story in 90 minutes, like get a different job. Go write a novel. I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
yeah. Well, so that's it. So, but back when we were working on TA, you went open throttle. You made things as big as you possibly could because it was just all blue ocean, right?
Yeah.
Again, it was so small to begin with. It would be like we went from making 20-minute movies to hour-long movies. You know what I mean? We still had headroom, in a manner of speaking. I don't know if that analogy really works, but it's close.
Get close enough.
Were you still, no, keep going. Go ahead.
And so everything we did was like, well, how can we have, first of all, how can we have more players than any other RTS game? They had like 8, we wanted 10. Maps were this big, we wanted maps that big. There was land units and some flying helicopters and things like that in other games. So I said, we want land, sea, and air, all three, because if you study, you know, war, which is just, you know, World War II is where I went for a lot of my inspiration, you know, modern warfare back even 30 years ago was less interesting, less personal than World War II, right? You guys know this. So
Absolutely.
we and George Lucas is famous for co-opting the dogfight scenes and using the dogfight scenes to kind of the choreography, as you all know, for Star Wars. So I was like, that's right. So we said we want to have land, sea, and air, and then there's a whole bunch of things that happen when you have that much interoperability of the units. You get emergent behavior, and that's the word of the day back then. When you have physics, you have emergent behavior. Things happen that you didn't even know were possible, but you had to trust it. It was a trust fall of game design philosophy. Just build lots of cool rule systems, make values kind of like what something should be. So something goes fast and it has a really powerful weapon and it's got a lot of armor. Well, by definition, it's going to be super expensive, you know? So if you,
Or super fragile.
you've got to make it, something's got to take away to make the value to make it balance. All the RTS games were balanced like rock. Well, not all of them, but a great deal of them obeyed a principle called rock, paper, scissors, right? This beats this beats that. If I create a unit, I've got to understand what beats it and what it can beat. We said no. We threw away rock, paper, scissors, and we said every unit stands on its own merits. If it's like we talked about, if it has something like the commander has the D gun, right? The D gun is the ultimate disintegrator weapon. It will destroy anything, but it only shoots this far, and you got to be right up on top of something to shoot it, which means that it sounds good at first. You're like, oh, I'm going to destroy everything. And it also costs you 1,000 energy to fire it. So you're like, So
I mean, that's it, right? Like that I think was what just got me with this game is like it's not obvious. It's not like, oh, you got to counter this with this. And so you got to have a mix of units that are like you could, in fact, many successful strategies in this game were just about pumping out 1,000,000 of the exact same unit or, something, some combination of two or three that was like really kind of up to you. It wasn't, you know what I mean? It just wasn't like, yeah, it just felt so fresh. And I want to mention something else, which a lot of people may have forgotten about, is I don't know if anyone else did this, but after this game shipped, you guys started releasing new units on the internet. Like, what was it? Like once a week
yeah.
or?
Yeah. So I told Ron, was really a close collaborator through this whole thing. The history cannot edit Ron out of this Total Annihilation story. So we got to drop a lot of kudos and a lot of props to Ron for all the things he did. And he had
So
ambition.
explain who Ron is for people who aren't.
So Ron Gilbert is really quite a celebrated and famous name in gaming.
Absolutely.
He created, he worked at Lucas Arts, and he did a game called, that got him probably the most fame and kind of attention was Secret of Monkey Island. And he had done this game before called A Maniac Mansion, and it was the scripting utility for Maniac Mansion, which is where the name Scum comes from. And Scum was sort of this, I think it was actually pretty well known in and of itself as
Absolutely. And it was
as a,
very ahead of the, in terms of editors and that kind of narrative editor, definitely ahead of the curve. Absolutely.
and you think about Scum, right? It's data driving. It's a tool set to data drive a game. So you could just use the same tool set over and over again. Well, Ron understood this probably better than anyone. He understood that you have a way to data drive, um, a game. And so when I told him about how baseball could allow me to create teams, and then I would use the same exact architectural paradigm to create units. So when the game started, literally the executable started, it didn't have any hard-coded anything in it. It went to the directory that it was installed in, because EXEs in Windows know where they launch, and it looks for a folder. And it goes into that folder and it counts how many factions there are, and then it allocates memory and it just loads whatever's in those folders right into memory. Like there's no safety net. It just puts it just loads it in. So if you were a crafty a modder, you would go and figure out the file formats and everything else, and you drop your unit into the folder, and presto, it would load up into the game. Well, the mod community, of course, figured this out pretty fast, and then it was a Cambrian explosion of stuff. Everything happened, right? And that's where modding really is a game changer for game and game engines, as we all know now. This is all, I'm talking about this like I'm discovering it here on this call, but this is all now 25 years old.
Right. But you were discovering it at the time.
You were,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And
And
I
it
wanna-
sounds
I
like
wanna-
I didn't know that you discovered it basically from the very beginning of your career. You've always been sort of following this path.
Yeah, it would. Well, and here's the thing: I don't give credit to me. I give credit to the fact that baseball demanded it. What happens if you
Right.
buy a baseball game and you come home and you want to make your own dream team? Well, you got to have an editor. You got to save it to the disk. You got to be able to drop a menu down and say, please load that team. So it doesn't take much to go from that to simply saying factions and units. It was I think it was there might have been a leap, but it wasn't huge,
Yeah, and I think we interrupted, or you were talking about how I think it was Ron who was leading the charge to be releasing episodic content for it. Is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, I think he said, I mean, conversations are fluid, right? We went to McDonald's. We love McDonald's. It was our guilty pleasure. I mean, don't tell anyone. Keep this a secret between the three of us. And we'd be driving and we'd be making shit up. And we had this joke. I don't think I've ever told anyone this joke. I said, we're either the two smartest guys in the games business or the two dumbest guys? We couldn't figure that out. We didn't have an answer to that question. And the thing was, it was like, we should make new units and have units launched. And Ron's like, yeah, we should do them every week. And, and then that became a thing. And then we thought it would be easy, not to plug
Right.
the
Nice.
show, but it was actually a giant pain in the ass, because if you had someone was sick or a holiday or someone was, you had to have all these units in the queue. So like a
Exactly.
shotgun, in case something went wrong, you'd have one ready to go over Christmas. And so it was a pain in the ass, but it turned out to be a pretty big deal. And it was possible because of the data-driven model, which fed right into the modding, and all those pieces just effortlessly fit together. It was really nice.
So,
Well,
and
it turned
oh,
TA into
let me jump in here for a second.
yeah.
I want to come back to it because a couple things here. You're talking about the sophistication of the units and how many axes units have, which is great. And that's so much more real, and I can do so much more with it. And it exponentially fucking harder to balance.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason that that units get simplified down and you look at a rock paper scissors is because that's as you can get your head around how to balance it, right? So you made yourself an enormously big problem. How did you solve the balance problem?
Well, I was pretty naive. I was like, this is what we're doing. And then a young guy, I think he was 21 or 22, or maybe he's 25. He might have been a little older. His name is Jake McMahon. And Jake was kind of this spreadsheet guy. Like, he loved to bust out the spreadsheet. So what he did is he had an algorithm that he was applying, and he had all the units, and he said, well, if it goes this fast, if it has a weapon that can
Okay, exactly.
shoot like this, and he just worked the spreadsheet over and over and over. And I was like, I look over at his office and I go, God bless you.
Well, that's ultimately like when we're doing like hero clicks or anything that's got thousands and thousands of units, right? That's really the only way to do it, because in terms of play testing them, the volume gets too high, right? You can't actually set up tests. I mean, later you could start to build automated testing, but not in the days when we were doing this, right? So you actually had to develop a formula that allowed you to say, oh, okay, if it's got these things, like it's going to have, like, each unit has to have a total number of points that it's earning, and so I'm going to have to find places where it's below average, where it's above average, and balance it internally to itself within the kind of points algorithm that you've set up for balance. So it's I mean, I still think that that's a valid way to go, within any kind of large context game.
I mean, I think we were at the point where we couldn't do the math any other way. Like, there was no other path forward. I will say this, though, that I'm proud of, that I entrusted a young man who knew nothing at all about game development and knew nothing about RTS games up until that point. And I completely trusted him to make the hard decisions, and I did not interfere with him. Like, I didn't lean over his shoulder and tell him to change a bunch of stuff. I said, you're in charge of this. You got to make it work. And it's on you, and gave him 100% of the responsibility. The only call out is that the commander unit, if it took a direct hit from a nuke from the opposite team, I said to Jake, I go, you cannot destroy a player's commander with a direct hit. He can have one sliver of health left when the nuclear mushroom cloud has cleared, but you cannot destroy him. He has to be able to walk away from a nuke, because that's like a Hollywood movie moment, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As long as he has enough health to walk away from a nuke. Now, two nukes, of course, he's not going to handle, but one nuke, he gets to walk. And that was the only thing that I remember that I said to Jake, I'm going to reach into your spreadsheet. I want that.
Trusting people on your team
Yeah.
is a core component of a successful creative process, right? Because you can't micromanage everything. So you have to find good people, listen to good ideas, and then trust them to do a good job, which allows you to be focusing on the other things that need attention.
And it doesn't always work.
Nothing ever has always worked, right? Nothing. Whether you did it all yourself or you
And that's
trusted.
why I'm doing podcasts instead of designing games, everyone.
Boy.
Well,
Well,
So the other thing I wanted to touch on, Antonio, you're talking about add this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and all these incredible things we're adding. What did you subtract? Right? What were the things you decided to give up in the design to allow the time and money to be able to build all the new things we're at?
well, this is a chance to call out another designer that I had brought in, and he worked with me on triple play baseball. His name's Rick Smith, and he did this amazing thing. Just to go back to triple play, if you guys know rules of baseball, like if a pitcher pitches and goes and their team is losing, and the manager swaps him out for another pitcher, and the team loses, he gets a loss. If the new pitcher comes in and saves it, he gets a win or a save. And there's and then there's National League and American League exceptions, asterisks. It will, if you're a programmer and your head's down and you're trying to make a game with graphics and physics and everything else, and someone's explaining National League versus, your head spins. So Rick came in, and Rick wrote what I think is one of the smartest things you can do in game solving this kind of problem. He wrote pseudocode in Rick language. And he just said, if this thing, then this thing. If not, this thing. This thing, and he didn't have to, and I took it and I translated that into code, and that's how my stats engine was built from Rick's pseudocode.
Wow.
Okay. Which was just, at the time, it was like, this is a godsend. This is how, now imagine I'm working on Total Annihilation and I bring Rick in and I'm showing Rick my tech tree, and my tech tree is ridiculously ambitious. So I've got like 10 tanks that you could evolve through. Tank level 1, tank level 2, tank level 3, because I have World War II in my head, where you had all these over the course of the years of the war, you had all these tanks.
Yeah.
And Rick just went, that's nuts. And I remember the day we were in a conference room and he said, you can't, those are just too many tanks. And I said, you know what? You're right. You're right. He could have knocked me over with a feather. As soon as he said it out loud, I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a level 1 tank for tech tier 1 and level 2. We're going to simplify the tech tree down for the tanks. And it was exactly the right thing to do. Now, the game design still grew virally in every other damn direction that it could go in, right? We had amphibious units, we had units, transport units, we had legged robot units versus tracked units. Like we literally made the land units tech tree twice as big, because we had, but I knew something fundamental.
You're talking to the Battletech McWarrior guy. I know that problem.
Yeah. And I said, people like one kind of unit, and there's people that have a love for another kind of unit. So give them choices and know that they're not going to probably adopt both of them in any one game style. They're probably going to pick one over the other. And some people do go, they love air. They just pick air versus, land. I think that might have been probably a little much, but the damn K-bots, as we called them, were had so much character, had so much kind of personality. If you were going to make a toy line, you were going to do it with the K-bots more than you were going to do it with the tracked vehicles, like the Fido. Could you bring up the Fido? Is Kevin pulling up a Fido on that list? He's in the core. It's in the arm side. There it is. There's the Fido. And the Fido was a Gauss cannon mounted on top of a dog-like character and a dog-like robot. And by the way, this is the thing I don't talk about much. I made these names up like I was on a game show and I had 9 seconds to come up with a name. Like I was coming up with names every single day, and I was like, Fido, dog,
next problem.
Like I was doing a Rorschach test.
My favorite unit was the Pee-wee. I'm a Pee-wee guy.
Named after Pee Wee Herman.
Of course. What else could it be?
The Jeffy scout vehicle was named after Jeff Petkow, the designer, the engineer who did all the pathfinding code. It just kind of was like that.
I love it.
I knew that a name, you can't die on the name hill, and we didn't die on any hills regarding names. We made
in all this, like, because this is a different era of games, and I think I just can't help but ask, like, who, obviously you grabbed the wheel in your career in the transition over to Cave Dog and working on this kind of concept. But like, was there ever a moment where you had to ask permission, or were you just like every day you come in and you're throwing new cards down on the table? Like how you know, talk about that a little bit if you can.
Well, I gotta again, I'm gonna throw some props towards, you know, Ron. Ron, when he was at LucasArts,
Owen Taylor.
he was sorry about that. He got a lot of creative control, including his name on the box. And he really wanted to build a studio where he gave designers authority to do whatever they wanted and the responsibility that came with that authority. He would come around my desk somewhere around probably a year to 14 months into the project, which was 20 months. And he would have a list. He'd go play the game in his office and he'd literally type it out on the computer and print a sheet of paper and send it over and set it on my desk. And he said, there it is. And he'd turn and walk away, unless it was lunchtime. Then we went to McDonald's. But he would lay the thing, and I'd go down the list and I'd go, yeah, that's interesting. No, not doing that. Not doing that. Not doing that. Oh, that's ridiculous. That would be impossible to do. But nice thought. Oh, this is good. This is good. This is a good idea. He gave me the agency to basically do whatever the hell I wanted, but to take his credit feedback. Now I took that model and I used that model throughout the rest of my game development career, where I was like, if you're in charge, you're in charge. And here's my thoughts, here's my ideas, but I'm not going to just reach over you and change something and tell you how it's done. So I give a lot of credit to Ron for doing that. But man, there were days, right, where I woke up and I said, I want trees to have a forest fire model. And I'd spend the afternoon just creating this model of statistical likelihood that a neighboring tree would catch fire. Wreckage on the battlefield. I said, wreckage has to stay on the battlefield. Otherwise, you don't even know there was a war fought. It looks like a golf course if you don't have wreckage, right? But the wreckage smoking said some bad shit went down here, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Which,
Right.
And some bad frame rate's going to come from it.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I really agonized. I want to tell you, oh man, I'm talking a lot here. But what I realized is, because the screen was an isometric projection, if you had wreckage on that spot and that wreckage wasn't moving and didn't have a skeleton structure attached to it, and you cached it as a bitmap, the wreckage turned into something that was lighter weight than a moving unit. So the more wreckage you had, the more likely your performance would go up.
Right.
Okay, which
As
is
guys
so
start to die.
counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Because I agree with
not-
you. Back when I thought of it, I went, "Oh, I'm going to screw the frame rate having all this wreckage." But John Maver, who had come up with this system of, when we rendered a model and we rendered it into its own little buffer, and when you rendered it into the buffer, it became, with an alpha channel, it became a two-dimensional image of what would normally be like a three-dimensionally articulated unit. So if a unit was walking across like the Fido with the gun and it came to rest, it literally becomes a two-dimensional picture at that point. So if you had an army of bots and they're all moving together and they stop, your frame rate's actually going to go up. But if you select them all and have them all move, your frame rate's going to go down. But when they're all wreckage, the wreckage isn't going anywhere and the wreckage is cached. And I could talk about the technical details of it, but that was a game changer in terms of the caching of the bitmaps. And then he rendered them into a buffer that was twice as tall and twice as wide. And then he anti-aliased them down with a really fast anti-aliasing algorithm so that they had that warmth that you would see from Command and Conquer and other games that were pre-rendered bitmaps.
Yeah.
Because we had that sharp, jaggy polygon energy going on, and then we sort of got, for the stuff that wasn't moving, we clawed back a little of that sort of warmth with this anti-aliasing algorithm. So we were kind of one foot in both worlds.
I'm going to roll you forward, because this steamrolling is, really always been one of my great pleasures in life. Cave Dog to gas-powered games. Why?
Well, I try to candy coat this one as much as I can, but me and Ron, we got along famously throughout the development. We were like, I dare say we were best pals. But when the bean counters got a hold of what he had promised me as a sort of a financial arrangement, they reneged. And I felt really butthurt over the fact that Ron had made me a promise and that the folks probably at GT Interactive um, said, they looked at him and they said, we're not going to pay this guy a royalty on every game. You're going to give him a bonus, and the bonus is going to be probably 20 to 25% of what he thinks he's getting, which is when I got the bonus check, I said, this is not what I thought was going to happen. I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I worked for 20 months sleeplessly. I mean, I bled to make this game. And I had this in my head that I was going to make this big, I was going to get, get to the pot of gold. And I've asked all the various people. I asked the CEO of then CEO. I've gone around and everybody points at someone else and
Right.
explains
Right.
why they couldn't write me the check that I was entitled to. And so I said, well, look, I always wanted to, I was like, I kind of did when I walked into Distinctive Software in 1988 and saw Don Matrick's studio with all the people busy working away. I was like, ooh, I want to have a game company too. I want one of these. So basically, it was like an excuse handed to me on a silver platter. I think it was more me seeing, hey, there's an opportunity here. I've got an excuse, emotional excuse. Boy, oh boy, who's that guy? Uh, and,
Poor kid. Yeah.
I had an excuse, and I left, and I was basically, propelled with a certain amount of vim and vigor, and kind of wanting some I can do this. I was, and it was actually the right thing to have happened. Had I been paid this extra money from these alleged, royalty agreement that we'd made, then I probably would have gone down with the ship when Humongous and GT Interactive fell apart. So I use this analogy for years. I said, if you're driving down the road with someone in a car and they open the door and you go, what's happening? And they shove you out of the moving car, you're like cursing at them as you get road rash and you come to a stop and you stand up all bloody and you watch the car speed off into the distance. And then you see it careen off a cliff and there's a fireball rolls up and you go, hey, thanks.
Right. Exactly.
Like, wait for it. So in a sense, that's kind of been my career with things that happened certainly in the United States. Canada, I could have stayed on the gravy train, there's no question about it, but it would have been a boring, wealthy gravy train.
But again, like I'm struck. It's like once again you've done. I keep coming back again and again to this idea that like you're just not asking anyone's permission, right? You're just like, oh, I'm gonna go do this other thing. I'm gonna do this other thing. I mean, where like do you find in yourself like, yeah, I just I'm not afraid to do that, or like, what were you afraid, or like, where did the guts come from to kind of do this over and over again?
It's a naive. It's why people do stupid things as well as get lucky and do smart things. Jump off roofs and things, and they land in the swimming pool. But when they miss the swimming pool, it's not pretty, you know. And you've seen those now. We get to see those now on Instagram. Thank you, thank you, Meta. So the some of you are like, I totally get it. And some of you are like, that's not in my feed. That's not in my feed. Uh, it'll be in your feed. If I send you one, it'll be in your feed. The point being is that fearlessness is, I don't think, a recognized quality in the first person of living the experience. You just go, well, here's what I'm doing next. Like, was I putting away for 401k? Was I thinking about how I'm going to put my 3 kids through college? Oh, hell no. I was just I was going to live forever like everyone else who
Oh,
was
yeah,
in their
there's just
30s.
something cool, and I've got to make it. I've just
Yeah.
got to make this cool thing. The
Yeah.
rest of it is really secondary.
I think
But
what, go
you
ahead.
also jumped. You not only did you start your own shop, but you also switched genres once again, right?
That's
So you're
true.
going sports to RTS and now RPG.
That's right. And I pulled this out too. I have these, oh, they're kind of dusty now. This shipped in 2000
Yeah,
and
that's just making me feel old because this is when I got to know you. Was when you were working on this because this was you were working on this with Microsoft. I was at Microsoft at the time.
well,
You had to work with me because Ed said so.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was forced into your life, uh, and it was an incredibly exciting title that you were working on, man.
Yeah, we wanted to basically it was like we had a certain kind of creative rule break the traditional rules of game development. So we had done, and when I was doing the design document, it's like I use this quote a lot, Jumanji, where the writer of the script go or the screenplay goes, and a herd of elephants crash through the living room. Easy enough to write it, but then
Exactly.
someone's got to go make it happen. And on Dungeon Siege, I was like, I never want to see a loading screen. And then we worked for 4 years to build a world where you would never get a loading screen. And then that became this node system where continuously streaming on the front edge of the view frustum of the world. You had 3 dimensions, and we wanted to go upstairs. You had to fade layers out and have all these triggers to do all this management of the view space. I mean, we didn't need to do it to make a game that would sell whatever 1 million copies at the time, which was both good and kind of just good enough. But we wanted to just make something that no one else had ever seen before in a game. And even this video, this B-roll that's rolling here, is reminding me of some of the super technically hard shit that we did. And we were determined to do that. We had to bring the same energy that we had brought to Total Annihilation to the world of RPG games. And
Not to mention when you touch on the technical, like this game was one of the first games to feature an entity component system, which is now what Unity is. Unity is the entire design philosophy behind it is an entity component system. So like, I remember hearing about and seeing like all the tech you had to invent just to make a bunch of this possible.
Part of the question I've gotten, you and I've had this conversation many times, right? Because you're much smarter than I am, so you approach it from a very technical point of view in terms of like being able to actually code, whereas my coding skills ended when I was about 18 years old. Um, and and in some cases, it's like is the tech justified by the design? Did the design need that much tech? Did it need 4 years of tech development before you could actually get to gameplay? You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's always a tough balance because when you're in the midst of it, right, you can be so excited about different aspects of it that it becomes sometimes completely inadvertently where the vast majority of the budget goes, and it can sometimes very appreciated by players. Other times it's like that just wasn't needed. Any as you look back on this game and think about what people talked about and what struck a nerve with people. What any reflections on that?
well, we didn't have a lot of um input from the community, right? This was all under wraps. We had the folks at
Yeah,
Microsoft
absolutely. During development, absolutely. Yeah,
during
absolutely.
development. So it was our team that was its own judgment. Like we were going to have a big warrior dude on the front of the box, and Sarah, who was our almost obligatory female person in the company, designer in the company, said, "Why do we have to have a big warrior guy? Why can't we have a powerful woman warrior on the front of the box?" and we were like, "You're right. You're absolutely right." So we ended up with famously our Dungeon Siege what we call farm girl
Yeah,
on the front of the box, which was such a great decision. So we were in our own little bubble, and we had to make the best decisions we could with the input that was coming from the team. Now, when we ran into a problem that was enormously hard to solve, we backed down because we were under a constraint. The budget was like $4 something million, 4.3 million, or even less. Oh God, I think it was even, no, it was $2.5 million, which seems like a ton of money at the time. And we blew that budget and we ended up spending 6.3 million. I'll never forget that magic 6.3 million number. And we were working every day of the week. We didn't sleep under the desk, but we might as well have been. And we were having the greatest time of our life.
It's also a good segue into something that I think you've wrestled with as in the examples you've been discussing, like work life balance, right? And
Yeah.
and the those kind of crazy crunches and death marches, right? Has your how have you evolved in your thinking of those over the years?
Well, first of all, we had zero work-life balance. In fact, if you had any work-life balance, I probably cut you from the team. Like I didn't want you to starve to death, to be perfectly clear. I did highly support eating, but I was not in support of you not showing up Saturday and Sunday. You had to come to work almost every single day of the week during the crunch and the milestones that we had to deliver. Um, and that got old. But in the last 6 months of the 4-year stretch, we were there 6 months, every single day of the week, 12 to 14 hours a day. And
Wow.
so then I think it was within that time frame, there was the EA Widow. Remember EA Widow? There was this whole work-life balance thing that went down, and it was kind of like, okay. But when that happens, your costs go up because now your games are going to take longer to make, and you got to pay people overtime, or something has to give, right? And then suddenly the publishers
Or scope, right? I mean,
scope has
there's
to get
only so many
reduced.
activities you can. Yeah.
Yeah, publishers have to pay you more money, and the industry wasn't mature enough to realize what it cost to make those games. Those games were, although I will say, when I was doing Total Annihilation for 1.1 million, which was the total cost of, Ensemble Studios did version 1 of Age of Empires for a rumored 10 million. Okay, we spent 11 million on Soupcom 1. They spent 25 million on Age of Empires 2. So we were always kind of the underdog in terms of trying to make games for a lot less money than and when someone walks into Egghead Software, they don't say, how much did that one cost to make? How long did the team work on that? How many divorces? I want to know how many people got
Yeah.
divorced on this, right?
Yeah.
It's just a damn game in a box. That's it. That's all you get.
So
And I also think, though, I mean, what I encountered at several places was that um, the crunch, I think, often was very misleading in terms of its actual productivity, because people are human beings and their productivity goes down over time, right? So the more hours in is actually not the equivalent of productivity out, you know. But when you're so caught up in it, I don't think, it's very hard to recognize that, and so you just keep pushing for more and more, and I think often you're getting less and less, you know.
You could be absolutely totally right. We did not have your uh you know your view in the
Well, I made
in the
these
DNA.
mistakes too when I was young. Oh my God. I mean, even when we borrowed your closet at Gas Power Game to start Harebrained Schemes, right? That started with this crazy 12-week game jam. And that was 7 days a week, but it was only 12 weeks long. And then
Yeah, yeah,
we stood up. But I mean, it's hard to see when you're in it. It's totally hard to see when you're in it.
yeah. And
but so let me
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I had the energy. I'm 60 next year, and I still have more energy than most people my age. So if you go back, I used to tell people when I came in a room, for right or for wrong, the paper started to peel off the walls. Okay. I was always like, I was so hyper. My parents rather, took me to the doctor, and they said, what the hell's wrong with our child? And you don't want to know where that went. But The fact is, I was so hyper. That hyper energy found a lightning rod called game
Yeah.
development, and a lot of people had a hard time with my passion and my energy and just relentless dedication to working to get something built. And it wasn't for everyone, and it was destructive. It was destructive for a number of people. It was.
So let me ask you, because like this is, you know, I was a fan working in the software store. There were stores you used to go to buy
Yeah.
software kits.
Tell me.
Uh, they weren't virtual. Um, and then I joined gas powered um after Dungeon Siege. And so I didn't, I wasn't there for a bunch of this, but I just, one of the impressions I took away, and you should absolutely correct this, is that this was a really painful game to make, ultimately. And, give me your take on that. Like, was it, it was obviously innovative in a bunch of ways. It was super ambitious for the time and the budget, and
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
technology. But like, what was the aftermath like?
Well, you're reminding me of something kind of important. When we did Total Annihilation and then later we do Subcom, and why I'll tell you why we returned to RTS. You craft a unit, you craft a Pee-wee, you craft a Jeffy or a Fido, and you see it over and over and over and over again. You play 100 games, you see it 100 times. When you play through the Dungeon Siege world, you start at the farmhouse, and within 2 minutes, the farmhouse is 60 hours in your past. You may never see the farmhouse again. It's much more like a movie, but a really expensive movie, and it's 60 hours long. And you have to build the set of a movie with a moving camera shot, if you will. When they build they shoot an old Western movie, they try to figure out how they can shoot a lot of the scenes from different angles in the same Western town. And we're going to be in the saloon. There's going to be a shootout, but there's going to be a confrontation. We're going to be down at the jailhouse. And they're getting maximum value out of all this content that people built, right? Well, we didn't know that. We went in so naive, and we were just thinking this thing has to beat Baldur's Gate or whatever the game was that we were competing against. And so they had a lot of gameplay, but they had a lot of reuse. And we were building a lot of rich purpose, custom content. And we learned that lesson the hard way. So it was kind of a sort of painting ourselves into a corner from a content production standpoint. At the end, we started getting crafty, putting snow on, doing a texture swap. Like we got desperate. Like I'll give a great one of my favorite examples. We had these big black spiders in the spider crypt. And one day I was like, let's just shrink the damn thing down with a scale value and change the texture to yellow. And then we'll have these tiny little yellow spiders. And it worked so well. It was like we had a whole new monster to kill. And that was
Yeah.
how we ultimately eased the pain, but we didn't do that nearly enough. And that's why if somebody said to me today, make an RPG, I'd say no. No, because you have no idea how much it costs, and it would end up being a procedurally generated world, and I want it to be a rich world with a lot of unique content, but you can only stretch the bed sheet, or whatever, so many different ways to accomplish that mission.
But I do think it's, I mean, the axes of always thinking about how much gameplay can I get out of any particular asset, right? The ability to reuse and small modifications, or even just explain it through the thematic approach to the story of why, right, why we're seeing these same assets so much, is really important, right? To be able to be able to do things within any kind of reasonable budget, you're going to have to think about a huge amount of high reuse, and I think it's a good thing for new designers to be thinking about all the time.
We didn't have it in our DNA. We really didn't
Right.
have it, and so we went into it blind, and we got ourselves into trouble,
I mean,
in a sense.
you're not only discovering, these kinds of content pipeline problems, you're discovering problems with the 3D world, you're discovering crunch, I mean, it's like, it's so easy to, go back and look at some of this stuff, but like when you're in the middle of it, it's like it's pure improvisation, right? Hair on fire. Um, yeah, and again, you're in this in a bunch of ways, you're in this space where like there's not necessarily a permission structure or, clean answers. A lot of those guardrails got built up later in the history of
Yeah,
the
we're just
industry.
everybody's figuring things out,
Yeah.
and it's also it's like even if you're starting a new studio now, it's so easy to make the same mistakes again. Or one of the questions I ask people, because I find myself doing this all the time, Chris. What are mistakes? What are the mistakes you repeat over the course of your career?
Well, the number one mistake I will make probably again and again too is I always think I can solve big problems and I can do it um, somehow because I'm more clever than I was last time, and I'm not. And when I started working on this new project, I kicked it off in 2017 for a web-based RTS game. I thought, oh, I'm going to build these ships. They're going to be procedural. There's going to be this and that. And then I got into it and I didn't have a team of 30, 60 people to keep me in line or help bounce ideas around and collaborate with. And I realized, oh man, this is super hard. Um, that's pretty it's what is it? What's the word? It's not humiliation. It's you know,
Well,
uh,
self-realization, right? I mean,
yeah, just
yeah,
realizing how much work every little thing takes. So if you think you can make a whole movie with the elephants crashing through the living room, and in the end you realize no matter who you are, like I mean, we see big filmmakers. I like the film analogy for some reason because more people have seen the films we refer to, but if you talk a big game for too much of your movie's going to be $500 million, $600 million. So somewhere has to give. And 300 seems to be like the outer limit of what they'll spend. But in gaming, Grand Theft Auto 6, I've heard, and this is unsubstantiated rumors, I've heard upwards of $1 billion on
Mm.
Grand Theft Auto 6. Now it might be 500 million, it might be 700 million, it might be the
right.
full
And
billion.
those same kind of numbers for the last Halo and things like that. It's insane numbers.
And I think the reason those things are happening is because there's not a lot of guardrails on the ambition of the design, and the money's there because they're like, hey, we're going to be able to sell this for tens of billions of dollars. Let's not screw it up. What's another $200 million, right? Well, this is like a whole new deal. This is nothing like we had. I mean, if we had to go back to the publisher for another $1 million, it was like, what what are we gonna get in return for this? Like, you're like,
I I I remember really clearly because you and I were talking, long after I was at Microsoft, I left Microsoft. You and I were talking often about how you would go in and you knew that that the publisher didn't really understand what it was going to take to make the game, right? So you would give them a number which you knew wasn't right, but it was like at the high end that they could imagine, right? And you were betting on the fact that during over the course of the process you were going to be able to illustrate and educate them as to why they needed to invest more into the title. um and it became this kind of serial seduction game because of the unrealistic expectations to start.
yeah, it's the ugly thing about game studio management. I would say it's a little divorced from the game design engineering, but it's got a connected tissue because you got to pay those people over there with something. You got to pay them with money. So you go over here and you kind of put a different persona on. You're no longer game designer guy going, hey, should we have another laser turret here or should we do this? Suddenly you're going, well, I have to get them pregnant with the project so that they won't cancel it because they've got sunk costs. Also, I've got to keep them motivated. So, hey, baby, you're beautiful. Some Hollywood sunshine and bullshit, right? At the same time, you're thinking, these people don't understand my vision. There's so much conflict going on. And I famously, not famously, at least it was at time, I said the worst shit ever publicly. I said at a DICE conference on a panel or something, I said, you got to lie to your publisher. Like, if you want to win, I'm telling you, it's like if you want to win, you got to lie. It's like if you want to win at hockey in the 80s, you got to hit them hard in the corners when the ref's not looking, right? You want to win hockey? That's what you got to do. But you don't go on record and tell and say that. You
That's
just
right.
don't
You
say the
were too
quiet
honest.
don't say the
You
quiet
said
part
you
out
said the
loud.
quiet part out loud. Yeah, you said
Yeah.
and you're famous for saying the quiet part out loud. There's no question
Oh,
about it.
oh,
You know.
terribly, terribly. And people would come up to me though 5 years later and they go, you know what? The first time I met you, you said the craziest shit, and I love that. I love that. And I go, well, thank God I have somebody. Can I come stay at your house when I'm homeless for saying the quiet part out loud?
But
you
so
know,
this is a question I wanted to ask you. I had like down when I was thinking about the interview and the conversation. So, you've always been you've always been not literally larger than life, but practically. Um Probably you define that term more than almost anyone I've met.
except Jordan. Come on now.
Oh, no, 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 no.
Well,
No, Chris, I'm a quiet. I'm a hermit. You've always had that persona that was really out there, and it's so important to accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish.
well, and that's kind of what my question is, in some ways it was it's it was better to be at the start of your career when you were with this kind of like, you know, energy and ability to kind of fill the room. Um and in some ways it's better now, right? Like in some ways now in this weird attention economy that we live in where like to get attention for a creative project is so hard. um it's like it'd be more of an impact now to be that guy, who said that crazy thing that was so memorable. So what do how do you feel about that? Do you think like, oh, if I was, still leading gas powered games now, it would be different? Or are you like glad that that was, you were in that part of your career then?
Well, I might be able to rally and produce some energy in a moment, but to produce energy over a work week, every day, long hours for years, there's some folks right now who kind of came from the same. They were kind of maybe second generation. They were kind of 90s guys, and they're working on studios that have been 5, 6, 7 years. Eight, one is 9 years, and they haven't shipped anything yet. I mean, something's gone different, and they have big personalities. These guys, folks who bounce out of these big $1 billion games that do $1 billion a month, even. I mean, there's some big type. Well, this particular case, I'm thinking maybe they were doing 2, 3 billion a year, right? So that that there was magic. They had magic hands, right? So they go out and they do a round and they raise $80 million, right? And then 4 or 5 or 6, 7 years they haven't produced anything, right? And I go, why is that? And part of it is it's a separate problem than what you're talking about, but it's expectation management. You know, I'm sure James Cameron sitting there going, I better retire soon because I don't want to make something that's bigger and more outrageous than Avatar, right? Like where do you go from there? Does the public appreciate that you can come down and tell and do something that's kind of more cozy and more realistic? And I kind of saw that happening to me a little bit. Everything had to be bigger and more outrageous and more money and more time and it doesn't work. It kind of goes off the rails at some point. Your question though is like, today would my personality serve it? And it might, but at the expense of actually really knocking years off the end of my life. Like I have a good
Yeah,
life now. I've reined it in. I'm in enterprise cloud now. Many people don't know that Kanoogi is my hobby. It's what I do weekends and evenings. I just got a new MacBook. It's got all the billions of cores, and I'm excited. And I'm working away on my stuff, and it's in the right. I've got my day job. I've got my game hobby job, and I've
Mm.
reset expectations. So if I can do something that looks like total annihilation, for example, in a browser that rolls the clock back 28 years, sort of, I can succeed at that. You see what I'm saying? Because I can't
Yeah.
go and build the
So
$100 million
it's kind of
RTS.
like you're becoming slave to other people's vision of you, right? Where you like have to just keep lighting the fire bigger and bigger and bigger, because otherwise,
And also I think there's also a difference in that, back when we were building those companies, and Chris was infinitely better at this, but you know, you go to a conference and you're on, right? And you're just this flaming ball of energy, and you're communicating and saying all sorts of really cool stuff and outrageous stuff. And then you get to go off stage, right? And nowadays there is no off stage. It's like you're on stage every day, right? And that's a totally different energy quotient, and how much energy you have to put into that versus actually making things, right? It's a very different equation than what we were facing, 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's the theme of this talk, right? We thought it would be easy, but we didn't do the calculus on doing all the things. Being the front man, being the lead designer, running the studio, making payroll, keeping the publishers happy,
Exactly.
talking to the fans, going to all the talks all over the world just to keep the ball in the air. It just frankly is too much. It's too much for one person. And I know that now. It sounds sad though when you package it all together like that. But what really, I mean, when you watch Jimmy Kimmel and you see a famous actor who starred in a movie sit down in the chair and have a conversation, have the chat on the talk show, they didn't say, yeah, I wrote the script, I directed the movie, I raised the money, that happened with what, how many people? Sylvester Stallone did it.
Charlie Chaplin. I mean, there
Yeah.
are auteurs out there who do it, and that's true in the game space too, right? But it's really rare and it's really hard, Um, and then we're gonna do one more question, then we'll go to our lightning round. But I've had a lot more failures than you have. Um, but we I think if you're gonna make things, there's gonna be failure involved. There's just that's just the reality, right? You can't make things without without some of them not working, or without most of them not working. How do you pick yourself back up afterwards? How do you get back up to the batter's cage and swing again?
Yeah, well, that was happening a lot in the final days of gas powered games. We had the economic, what do we call it? We called it the recession or the Great Recession,
Yeah,
Mhm.
where
yeah, 2008,
titles were being
everything.
canceled. We had a game with Square Enix that was canceled. We had a game with Disney that was canceled. We had a game with Microsoft that was canceled. Everything was getting canceled, and I had all these staff on the team, and they're family, and you're laying them off, and people do not like you very much when you lay them off. They I was making pottery in the later stages, and I gave some of the people a piece of pottery that I made with my hands, and it was like, this is my pottery, and they'd be laid off, and that piece of pottery I gave them was sitting on their desk. Like, F you for laying me off.
Yeah,
And so the hurt of failure is far more than just, oh, my balance sheet's not looking as good. You
yeah. It's
know,
really not about numbers, man. It's not.
pe- people won't talk to me to this day, who or avoid me, or where all I was a boss who made who was gave them the job, and I had to cut them loose. And that's tough. But what did we do to get back on our feet? I don't think we really actually did at Gas Powered Games. I think we rolled from one painful experience to the other. Um, we eventually sold because we had a Kickstarter that failed. Now, something I got to call you out on here for being excellent, top of the class, A+ Kickstarter projects. If
Well,
anybody you should give a master's class on that master class thing on Kickstarter, because you know how to do it. I never
yeah.
raised
I
a
think it's also a
penny.
matter of it's also a matter of timing, right? Because like we did one, Jonathan and I did one last year, and it was not a huge success, and it was incredibly hard. And I think it's like anything, right? The marketplace keeps changing, the expectations keep changing, the methodology to be successful keeps changing. And there were some mistakes I clearly made in the development of it, but, and then it's also just a harder environment too. So even if you've been successful in it, there's no guarantee you're going to be successful again, right? And we worked hard, and we didn't get anywhere near the results we'd hoped for.
I mean, I think that's why we made this podcast, right? It's like, why the rules change. What was successful in the past, is no longer guaranteed, or in some cases is net negative. Um, and it happens over and over in games. And your career, Chris, is a perfect example of like that journey, right? Starting data driving as a basically a solo developer, all the way up to, running a studio for like at least, was it 15 years? And then selling it. And like, it's I mean, it's crazy that anyone would do this stuff. And yet the same kind of like chimeric, shifting weirdness of making creative things draws you back again and again and again, even though, it is in some ways so treacherous. And I think it's very interesting to me that you've got your day job now, as you said it, which is sounds a lot more predictable and stable, but you're still drawn, right? You're drawn back to the creative act.
Well, here's the litmus test, or the moment of truth, as it were. You have kids, and they say, "Dad, what should I do for a career?" And they never ask. That was all. That was theater. You don't say, "You should be a game developer, a game designer. You should be like what I did because I was just, oh, it was so good." Nuh-uh. I tell my sons, enterprise cloud. Get a gig where you can get a work-life balance. So listen to me, hypocrite guy, 30 years later, 40 years later, where if you're sick one day and you don't go to work, you get a sick day and you just get to take care of yourself. Oh, isn't that nice? Personal time, all these benefits. There's really no death march. There is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's just wonderful. And you know what? The money is so much better if you're good at it. If you're really good at enterprise cloud. A friend of mine, I will not name him, pivoted from gaming. He worked at Google for the last 10 years. He quit, he retired. His last comp package was close to 900 grand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he slipped his boss the "I resign" letter, and I'd be like, you might want to stick with that a little longer. Um, but he's like, "I got so much money," his words, and I'm like, ah. And he worked on things like Chrome,
Right.
not romantic. You're not going to
Right.
go to a conference and hear him get up and speak about, oh, how he worked and all this sort of romantic songs around the fire shit from the days of yore. No, no, no. He's just finding bugs in the system and optimizing shit and making it work better and saving the company millions of dollars because it was more of this and more of that and making millions. And so gaming, if you want to make money, I don't think gaming is it. I think gaming is an art form that
Yeah.
it has to satisfy something in your soul. It's not a get rich quick scheme, although many did. Many did get very wealthy in the 80s and 90s if they had a plan to exit and hit it all exactly the right way. But I never had I never planned my career around making money. I literally turned down, and I can say this, I think, I turned down an offer to close to 30 million right after Dungeon Siege shipped.
Yep.
No.
I remember talking to you about this at the
Got
time.
another
Yeah.
one for 24 million after Soupcom shipped. No. Got one for 20 million that had a lot of strings attached. Like I had to give 10 million back if I didn't do this and meet this goal. Still, that was 10 million. I passed up all these opportunities to sell because I wasn't interested. And this is going to hurt a lot of people's brains. They're going to be like, what are you talking about? You could be living on an island or something. And a small island and a really cheap, hard to get to island, but an island. No sushi chef for you, but you got the island. And I just said, I don't want money. I want my studio. I want to make games. I want to come through the doors and say, this is my playhouse that I get to make cool shit in. And there were people, though, who said, I want to build something that I can sell. I want to build something that I can sell for a lot of money so I can exit and have my own island. And they did exactly that. And you know how you know? You haven't heard from them since.
Right.
They haven't. They don't go to a conference. They didn't write a book. They don't talk to students at a university. You've never heard from them again. And so the answer to the question is, did they really love games?
Right.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the proof. They didn't give a shit about games. They gave a shit about money.
Well,
all
and
right,
this
but
is
all of
what,
us, all of us here are stupid enough because we love games, so we're still here.
and this is something I think about a lot. And you sometimes you hear from the audience, right? You hear from the fans, and they say things like, "How could they do this?" You know, they'll be talking about some choice that was made, or "How could they not do this?" This other thing that they feel like is so obvious. And you know, one of the things you observe if you're in games long enough is there are, of course, all different types of personalities, but you see that person who maybe they got into games because they loved games. They played games. Or maybe it was just, you know, it just cropped up and they found themselves there. But there is that certain type of person who will be in the games industry and level up and level up and level up and level up. And as they level up, they do get, you know, maybe they don't get rich, or if they're at a publisher, maybe they do get some cash and their lifestyle starts to expand. And, you know, pretty soon they don't even like games anymore. But what they have is a career and a position, and you know, two really nice cars, a really nice home somewhere, you know, a family that kind of depends on them. And so their whole perspective on why they do what they do changes to be about that and not about the quality of games. And so, you know, I don't think anyone on this call is one of those people, but you know, you see that happen. I'm sure you guys have even more in-depth stories like that. And those people, you know, at times are the ones who make the choices that lead to some of the outcomes that create this sort of, you know, I don't want to say like quagmire in games, but I do feel like in places in the industry, it has created that quagmire. And we do have fans who are asking, why isn't this more dynamic? Why isn't it like it was, you know, certainly on Twitter, you
Yeah,
see people talk about this. Why could they make these cool games back then? And now we're just getting, you know, things that are a little bit more,
Out of the
derivative.
sausage, out of the sausage
Yeah.
factory.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and it's a great subject, which we should invite Chris back and talk about in more depth,
Yeah.
because I do think there's that whole concept of you know, creative risk taking and balancing that games is a commercial art form, right? And
Right.
the commerce and the art and how those balance and the yin and yang and pull between them is you know, a constant battle. Um, so a worthwhile discussion, but we don't want to do too much of that right now. Maybe if Chris is nice to us, he'll come back and we can talk about that whole subject.
Yeah, and we can on our list of things to talk about is advances against royalties model and other models used in the games industry to basically make it extra hard to win, which is a really important conversation for people starting up.
Yeah, I think that would be really worthwhile. I just and really talking about, you know, because I mean, you know, putting our studio manager hats on and our relationship with publishers and self-publishing and all those kind of things, talking about some of the dirty underside of gaming and giving some advice to others who are considering it.
Yeah,
All right,
I don't
we will definitely do that one. Let's do that one, gents. I hate to say it, I have to go.
Yeah. You gotta go.
It has been a true pleasure talking, Chris, and we definitely wanted to do part two and talk about you know, all the underbelly parts of the business, and hopefully we can tempt you back in. I'll bring over hamburgers to the barbecue. You know, I'll pay for that.
We'll have to have that barbecue. Yeah. All right.
Chris,
Well,
anything
this has been fun.
anything you want to talk about that you're doing that you want to like promote, or any other way that we should follow you or your work, or anything you got
Well,
going on?
I went and built my own custom commenting system on Kanoogi. So if you go to Kanoogi and create an account, you can drop a comment in there after the update. I drop an update and then you can comment. Absolutely wonderful. If folks who have ever played any of my games want to come by, they can ask me any question they want. I'll answer it generally right away within a day or so. And I love to see that community of people that can come together instead of my community of folks that want to interact with me going off to Discord, they can go to Kanoogi and actually talk on my own site. And I built the whole system myself because I've got this new kung fu in the enterprise cloud space. So I'm using it to build community tools.
Kanoogi, how do you spell that?
Kanoogi.
Kanoogi. All right, there you go. Check it out.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, this has been a long episode, but rich. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate always the chance to talk to Jordan and Chris. It's great to catch up now that we both have gray in our beards.
Seth was a long gray beard. Fuck mine.
Yeah,
so please, no, go ahead.
No, I was just saying when we're down to here, we know it's the party is over. Okay, pack your shit up. The beer's gone. Go home. Just like the end of this podcast.
Just like the end of this podcast. So thank you everyone for watching. Please rate and review our work. Give us feedback. We like feedback, probably, but we'll always read it. We do.
He'll read it and tell me.
So. Exactly. I'm the designated reader. So yeah, thanks everyone for the time, and we'll see you next time.